This is Josh Beiser from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this critical thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future critical thought topics. Alright, before we get started with today's critical thought, in case you missed yesterday's announcements, first off, I wanted to see if anyone knows how to make good thumbnail art or good intro outro videos for the channel, and would be willing to help me out in that regard. Because I would like to spruce things up a little bit, try to make it stand out more, but it is definitely beyond my artistic abilities. So if you know someone or will be able to help me out, and would like to get mentioned for and stuff like that, please let me know in the comments below. Regarding the Nier Automata play, it's still going strong, but as you know, I put up 6-7 videos in the last 2 days about it. So I think I'm going to try and space things out, maybe a day on streaming, then a day off, stuff like that, because I'm sure watching nothing but Nier Automata will probably put some of you to sleep. But what do you think about how things are being broken up right now in terms of having the side quest videos and then the actual progression videos? Let me know in the comments below regarding that. And one last thing, actually two last things. The first one is, what did you guys think about the idea for a new Patreon reward with kind of having a group critical thought discussion? Anyone who pays for this amount, we basically have a group discussion for 40 minutes to an hour and that kind of thing. Also, the other thing I wanted to ask you is, would you guys be interested in having daily or maybe every other day Twitter polls for what you'd like me to stream on the channel? Just because, as we know, we're still in kind of that doldrums period, and I'm sure there are a lot of games I haven't had a chance to look at, and I figure this could be a great way to get some more interaction and get a little bit more diversity in terms of the games going up. But let's get today's critical thought, and this is going to be sort of tying into the Nier Automata play. We're returning to the topic of difficulty levels in game design, and I know we've had a few discussions in the past about it, and I'm sure we'll have several more in the future. Nier Automata, like the first Nier, is a game that unfortunately suffers from some really imbalanced difficulty settings. The issue is that it becomes normal is ridiculously easy, you're tanking damage left and right, and then you go to hard and enemies are killing you in 1 to 2 blows. And for those of you who didn't watch the video yet, the Nier Automata play that I put up today, the high and low, or the high ups and downs of a boss fight, that one, watch the part where I fight the Adam and Eve fight, and take notice of how much damage they were doing to me. The first part of that fight, I was playing it on hard, and with about, I think I had 1,400 points of health, they were pretty much killing me in one single hit. And then I lowered down to normal, and it went from 13 to 1,400 to about 4 to 500. And because of that delay, I could easily just heal myself out of any damage. And that, in my opinion, is not a good way to have difficulty levels. And we've had this debate both on Game Wisdom and here, but there is a pros and cons regarding difficulty settings in game design. Many people don't like it because they feel that it creates an imbalanced kind of design, and usually the best balanced games are ones that have one set difficulty. So a really good example would be the Soulsborne series. The pro argument for difficulty settings is that it can lead to some very creative use of challenging the player, such as having new enemies appear in Ninja Gaiden Black, new loot or progression in Diablo, and if it's done even better than that, you can even have almost completely different games. In Ninja Gaiden Black, for instance, they completely adjust the game in terms of the enemies, the boss fights, and even what items you find, depending on what difficulty. And then there's, of course, from the accessibility point of view. And this goes back to that discussion about player-centric design, or designing a game in the sense that everyone who plays your game should be able to beat it. And I'm not a fan of that, and I'm kind of two minds regarding difficulty settings. Because when they're done right, as in a case like Diablo or The World Ends With You, they can add a lot to the game. But more often than not, it seems like difficulty settings just simply lead to imbalanced designs. Either there's just such a huge jump between each difficulty level that there's no point in playing on high, or it's to the point where the normal difficulty setting is when you can actually experiment with the game and do stuff, and then hard mode just simply restricts everything you can do. You either need to do things exactly right, or you can't play the game properly. And with a game like Nier Automata and the first Nier, this was a case where it's not challenging to play a game where I can die in one hit. It's simply just saying, it's simply just raising the bar so high up that it's not really about playing the game anymore. It's about hopefully getting lucky and realizing at any point I can immediately die and lose progress. It reminds me a lot of from the game No More Heroes. And for the final battle of that game on hard mode, you fight a similar lightsaber or non copyrighted lightsaber user, and you basically have to hit him 100 times without him hitting you once. Because on the hard difficulty, he does so much damage that it's basically an instant kill. And playing through that, it just wasn't all that challenging. It was frustrating, but I didn't really feel like I was learning or growing as a player. It just felt like, hit your head against a brick wall. So, getting this back to the question at hand, for you folks watching this, what do you think about difficulty settings? Do you prefer them in games, or do you prefer just a standard difficulty and go from there? For my money, like I said, I prefer standard difficulties just because I think 9 times out of 10 they are more balanced. And it goes back to expecting or having a baseline for your design. And this is a topic we've talked about before. But what it is the bare minimum of skill or understanding that someone should have in order to beat your game. And excuse me. And Nintendo does or has a really good example of this with the Mario Galaxy series, and how they teach you over the course of playing them what skills you need to know, what kind of obstacles you expect to find, and then the final level is the grand test. And if the player can't get to that point, well, then they either have to step up or they can't progress. Now, of course, Nintendo has done things with having the option to skip certain levels, but that doesn't really add to the player's growth in some sense. Now, I am going to take a quick break because I have to blow my nose, so I'll see you all in 1 second. And we are back. Sorry about that, everybody. It's allergy season here. Unfortunately, it's only going to get worse before it gets better. Now, with Nintendo's example of giving the player essentially a get out of jail free card, that also raises some interesting questions. And again, it goes back to this topic of player-centric design. Should every person who plays your game be able to beat your game, or should you expect a bare minimum of competency to say that if you can't get to this point of mastery, you can't beat our game? You either need to get better, or unfortunately, that's what we're expecting out of the player. Now, one thing that is new about difficulty settings or difficulty design that I want to bring up is a very unique case that I only know of 2 examples of this, and that is essentially a difficulty trial. Basically putting the player in a situation that will test them on their knowledge of the game and then suggest or assign a difficulty level from it. And like I said, there are only 2 examples of this that I know of, and if you've heard of any other games that do this, please let me know. The 2 examples are from The Witcher 2 and The Matrix Path of Neo. I'm sure everyone loved that game and remembers it fondly. But both games have a first level that's essentially a trial by combat. And as you get further and further in the trial, the enemies get stronger, you fight newer enemies, they get harder, stuff like that. And then at certain tiers of getting through it, the game will basically grade you on what difficulty level you can play as. So in the Path of Neo, the first thing would be like a standard security guard. And then it goes up to maybe a SWAT team. And then more guys. And then you fight an agent. Then you fight Agent Smith. And then as you keep going up, it'll basically say, oh, you've been so-and-so? Well, we suggest you play the game at medium. And the same goes for The Witcher 2. It started you off with like generic grunt enemies, then they throw in some neckers, then I think there's like a troll or something you have to fight, and then if you can beat the whole thing, it will say, well, congratulations, you can start The Witcher or Path of Neo at the hardest difficulty level, we suggest it. But the problem with this is that this kind of difficulty challenge isn't really testing the player on playing the game. It's testing them on combat, but this is a fixed scenario. With The Witcher 2, for instance, it doesn't teach the player or test them on leveling up, what items to use, what potions to drink, stuff like that. Nor does it test in the Path of Neo about the stealth sections or areas that aren't restricted, who aren't specialized in the hand-to-hand combat. So the question is just how effective are these training levels in terms of preparing the player for the right difficulty? It reminds me a lot of the challenge or the tutorial designs in strategy games, when they take place in a fixed or structured environment that is separate from actually playing the game. And we've talked about this before as well, but these tutorials don't help the player in learning the game because they're not training the player on what is actually happening in game. A enclosed environment is not the same as playing the game proper. So what ends up happening is that you're not teaching the player why they're doing certain things. You're teaching them how it works or what to do. You're teaching them what am I doing and how do I do it, but why. And being able to connect those dots from lesson to actual in practice is a failure of these kinds of closed training sections. But again, this is a topic that we can come back to time and time and again, and if you have any suggestions for topics relating to difficulty design, please let me know in the comments below. But we're going to wrap things up here for tonight because I have to get ready for our live cast. To summarize, difficulty design is a very hard, no pun intended, thing to get right. Too often or not, designers will make the difficulty just so imbalanced that basically everyone's going to stay on normal. Good difficulty, in my opinion, should reward players for learning the game and properly challenge them for doing so. If you can get by simply by, mashing attack on normal, then maybe on hard I should be able to be tested on countering attacks or dodging. And a really good example of this I want to bring up before I forget is from XCOM Enemy Unknown, and even to some extent XCOM 2, but I haven't spent as much time on that game as I would have liked. The different difficulties will increase the enemy's health and their 2-hit chance. Now, when you're playing XCOM Enemy Unknown on the easiest setting, you can basically just fumble your way through and you'll still have a good chance at winning. On the harder difficulties, you're going to be trained in using the hunker down ability to raise your cover, understanding how to make use of full cover, flanking shots, stuff like that. And this would be a good example of how different difficulty levels can reward players and properly motivate them to learn the mechanics, without, of course, punishing people who aren't good at the game. If you're not good at XCOM, play on the lower levels. If you know what you're doing and want to be challenged, bump it on up to Legendary or Veteran or whatever that difficulty was. And there's also another example I want to bring up. I'm not sure if you see a fly buzzing around me. That's perfect timing, actually. But with Etrian Odyssey, when the series was rebooted onto the 3DS, the developers actually changed how the difficulty settings work. The hard mode in Etrian Odyssey 1 and 2 is actually the normal mode from the original DS releases. What they wanted to do was say, if you like the challenge of the original Etrian Odysseys, play on hard mode. If you want something that's a more casual or a general RPG experience, play it on normal. And the difference is, of course, is that enemies do more damage. You're punished more for not properly building your teams on hard. But I found it to be still generally possible. But there can still be some measurement of grind. And that can be another part of difficulty design. When playing on the higher levels, it just simply makes it more of a grind or more of a slogfest to get through instead of testing the player. And when you have games that are just about raising stats and attributes, that kind of tends to be the lazy or poor man's effective difficulty. Again, in my mind, good difficulty design should test the player and should motivate the player or reward the player for going higher up. And before we go, this is another question I want to ask you guys. What do you think about difficulty settings that reward the player for playing on harder modes? We see this again in Diablo with higher item drops, more experience. The roll ends with you restrict certain items to difficulties. And when you play Grim Dawn, I think the drop rate and experience is also boosted for playing on the higher difficulty. Some the pros or the supporters say that this is a great way to motivate you to play the game harder, while people who are critics of this say that it's essentially punishing someone for not playing the game at its highest difficulty, or it just seems it doesn't seem to be like all that motivating to some people. But what do you think about that in terms of rewards for higher difficulty? I'm usually supporting of it. I think that it should be a way of making things interesting or providing, I guess, sort of a counterbalance to just raising the enemy's levels up. Maybe give me more experience. Maybe allow me to have more item drops to compensate for the fact that I'm spending more on healing. Now, with that said, there's also the question about allowing the player to control the difficulty at any given point. If I'm stuck at a fight, let me lower down the easy and then bump it back up to hard. But we're getting pretty high up there in terms of time, and I'm sure that could easily be its own topic in terms of letting the player control their difficulty. So we'll end things here. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you're a first timer, be sure to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think about the topics regarding the Patreon reward, Twitter polls, art, stuff like that. And otherwise, be sure to check back daily for more great content here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. And be sure to tune into our live stream on twitch.tv/GWBicer. And if you miss it, the recording will be on tomorrow. So until then, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBicer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBicer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.